She had been told to expect nothing. The man who arranged it, a town broker with a tidy mustache and sweat-stained collar, had been clear. "He is a quiet man," Mr. Croft had said, not unkindly. "He keeps to himself. It is a hard life, but honest. You will have a roof and you will not starve." Lin Mai had nodded, her gaze fixed on the scuffed floorboards of his office. A roof and food. It was the same bargain that had brought her across an endless ocean, a promise made of the most basic materials. She wore a dark red prairie dress, bought for her from the general store, the fabric stiff and unfamiliar against her skin. It was the color of good fortune, but it felt like a costume for a play she did not understand. Her own clothes, the soft, worn cotton of her homeland, were tied in a small, tight bundle at her feet. It was everything she owned in the world. Then the door opened, and the quiet man was there. He filled the doorway, not with bulk, but with a kind of stillness that seemed to draw all the air in the room toward him. He was tall, his shoulders broad under a faded blue shirt, his face weathered by sun and wind into a map of some private sorrow. His eyes, the color of a stormy sky, met hers for a brief, unreadable moment before flicking to Mr. Croft. He did not smile. He did not speak. He simply stood there, waiting, a presence more than a person. This was Josiah. Her husband. The word felt like a stone in her mouth. "Josiah," Mr. Croft said, his voice suddenly too loud. "This is Lin Mai." Josiah gave a short, sharp nod. It was not a greeting. It was an acknowledgement of a transaction. He looked at her small bundle on the floor, then back at her face. Lin Mai braced herself for a question, a comment, a sign of approval or disgust. None came. The silence stretched, thick and heavy as the summer heat. He turned and walked out. Mr. Croft cleared his throat. "He is not one for words," he explained, though the explanation was unnecessary. "His horse is outside. You should go." Lin Mai picked up her bundle. The knot was smooth under her fingers. She bowed her head slightly to the broker and walked out into the blinding glare of the street. A great black horse stood tethered to a post, patient and immense. Josiah was checking the saddle straps, his movements economical and sure. He did not look at her as she approached. He finished his task, then turned and simply held out a hand. It was not an invitation. It was an instruction. His hand was calloused and rough, the skin cracked over the knuckles. She hesitated for only a second before placing her small hand in his. He lifted her onto the horse's back as if she weighed nothing at all, seating her behind the saddle. He then swung himself up, his body a solid wall in front of her. She had nowhere to put her hand except for the worn leather of his belt. He did not flinch at her touch. The horse started forward, its hooves kicking up clouds of fine, pale dust. As they rode out of the small, dusty town, Lin Mai did not look back. There was nothing there to look back on. She was moving from one emptiness into another, her entire future held in the rigid set of the silent man's shoulders. The bargain had been made. The ride into the mountains was long, the silence broken only by the rhythmic plodding of the horse and the cry of a distant hawk. The sun beat down, and the world seemed made of only rock, dust, and the pale, unforgiving sky. Lin Mai kept her eyes on the landscape, memorizing the shapes of the jagged peaks, the way the light fell across the sparse, hardy trees. She was a student of survival, and this was a new and difficult language she would have to learn. Josiah said nothing. He rode with a familiarity that spoke of countless journeys along this same path, his body moving with the horse as if they were one creature. She could feel the tension in his back, a constant, low hum of something held in check. She wondered what he saw when he looked at this harsh, beautiful land. Did he see a home, or a prison? As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting long, distorted shadows, he finally urged the horse down a narrow, winding trail. Tucked into a small, sheltered valley, almost invisible until you were upon it, was a cabin. It was small, made of dark, weathered logs, with a stone chimney at one end. A thin curl of smoke rose into the cooling air, a sign he had prepared. It was utterly isolated, a tiny outpost of human effort against a vast and indifferent wilderness. This was to be her home. This was the roof that would not leak. As he dismounted and reached up for her, his face was still a mask, impossible to read. He had brought her here, to the heart of his solitude. Now she would discover if there was any room for her inside it. The cabin was one room. It was starkly clean, the floorboards swept bare, the few pieces of furniture plain and functional. A narrow bed was built into one wall, a rough wooden table and 2 chairs stood in the center, and a stone hearth dominated the far end. A pot of something simmered over the low fire, smelling of beans and salted meat. Everything was arranged with a severe, almost military precision. There was 1 plate, 1 cup, 1 fork on a small shelf near the hearth. The entire space was shaped by the stark arithmetic of a single person. It was the physical embodiment of the man who had brought her here, contained, guarded, and profoundly alone. Josiah placed her bundle on the floor by the door, then went to the fire, his back to her. He ladled stew into a single wooden bowl and set it on the table. He gestured for her to sit. It was a command, not an invitation. She sat, her hands folded in her lap, and waited. He took no food for himself. He stood by the hearth, watching the fire, his posture rigid. Lin Mai looked at the bowl. It was more food than she had seen at one time in months. Still, she did not eat. In her culture, the man of the house ate first. It was the proper way. She waited, her stomach hollow and aching. The silence in the small room grew, pressing in on her. The only sounds were the crackle of the fire and the whisper of the wind outside the sturdy log walls. Finally, Josiah seemed to notice her stillness. He turned his head slightly, his gaze falling on the untouched bowl. A flicker of something, annoyance? Confusion, crossed his features before being suppressed. He walked to the shelf, took down the single cup, and filled it with water from a pail. He set it on the table beside the bowl. He still did not speak. She understood then. He was not going to eat with her. He was providing for her, as the bargain stipulated, but he was not sharing a meal. He was not sharing his home, only allowing her to occupy a space within it. She picked up the spoon. The stew was thick and nourishing. She ate slowly, methodically, making no sound. She was used to being watched, judged. She ate half of what was in the bowl, then pushed it away. It was important to show that she was not greedy, that she did not take more than she needed. When she was finished, she stood, took the bowl and cup to a wash basin, and cleaned them with water from the pail. She dried them and placed them back on the shelf, exactly where they had been. 1 bowl. 1 cup. Throughout it all, he did not move from his place by the fire. He was a sentinel guarding the borders of his own loneliness. Later, he unrolled a thick blanket and laid it on the floor for her, a few feet from the hearth. It was a clear demarcation of territory. The bed was his. The floor was hers. Lin Mai lay down, pulling the rough wool up to her chin. She listened to the man's steady breathing as he finally lay down on his own bed. He had fulfilled his part of the bargain. She had a roof. She had food. But she had never felt so completely, utterly alone. The deep, resonant silence of the mountains was nothing compared to the silence of the man sleeping a few feet away. In the morning, he was gone before she woke. A pot of coffee was warm on the hearth, and a piece of dry bread was on the table. She drank the coffee, which was black and bitter, and ate the bread. Her small bundle remained by the door, a reminder of how little she had, how easily she could be sent away. She would not allow that. She had not survived a famine and a perilous journey to fail now. She would earn her place. One small thing at a time. She started by sweeping the floor, though it was already clean. She tidied the shelves, arranging the few tins of supplies into neat rows. Then she stepped outside. The air was crisp and cool, smelling of pine and damp earth. The cabin was sturdy, the work of a careful builder. But around it, there were signs of neglect. A small vegetable patch near the door was choked with weeds, the soil dry and cracked. A loose step on the small porch wobbled under her foot. A man alone, she thought, has time for his work, but not for the small things that make a house a home. This was where she would begin. She spent the morning in the garden. She pulled the weeds with a methodical patience, her fingers working deep into the soil to get the roots. She found a rusty spade and turned the earth over, breaking up the hard clumps. The sun warmed her back as she worked. It was familiar labor, grounding. This she understood. You tend the earth, and if you are lucky, it tends you in return. Late in the day, as she was using a bucket to carry water from a nearby creek, she saw a flash of movement near the woodpile. It was a cat. A scrawny, ginger-colored creature with one eye milky and blind. It hissed at her, its back arched, its fur standing on end. It was a fighter, a survivor, just like her. It was as wild and wary as everything else in this place. She left a small piece of her bread near the woodpile and went back to her work, paying it no more mind. She did not expect it to trust her. Trust was not given freely here, it had to be grown, slowly and carefully, like a seed in hard soil. When Josiah returned at dusk, covered in dust and weariness from whatever work he did in these mountains, he stopped for a moment, his eyes on the newly cleared garden patch. He said nothing. He walked past her into the cabin, the silence between them as vast and unyielding as before. But that night, as she ate her solitary meal, she noticed he had left the rusty spade by the door, cleaned of all its dirt. It was the first sign. A thing repaired. A tool offered. A word not spoken. The day settled into a quiet rhythm. Each morning, Josiah would leave before dawn. Each day, Linmai would find a new task. She mended a tear in his shirt, her stitches small and even, a nearly invisible seam. She scrubbed the soot from the stones of the hearth. She learned the sounds of the valley, the call of the birds, the rustle of unseen animals in the undergrowth, the way the wind sounded as it moved through the tall pines. She began to feel the shape of the life here, its sharp edges and its quiet comforts. The one-eyed cat, whom she had decided to call General, remained a wary observer. Every day she left him a saucer of water and a scrap of food. He would wait until she was gone before darting out to eat, his single green eye watching her every move. He was a creature of caution, schooled in the harsh lessons of solitude. She understood him completely. One afternoon, a week after her arrival, she was washing their few clothes in the creek when she felt a tentative brush against her leg. She looked down. General was there, rubbing against her ankle, a low, rumbling purr starting in his chest. She stayed perfectly still, hardly daring to breathe. Slowly, she reached down a hand. The cat flinched but did not run. She stroked his back, her fingers tracing the map of old scars beneath his thin fur. He leaned into her touch, his purr growing louder, a rusty engine coming to life. It was a small victory, but it felt immense. That night, for the first time, General followed her into the cabin. He ignored Josiah completely, walked over to her blanket on the floor, circled 3 times, and settled into a tight, furry ball. Linmai felt a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the fire. Something in this wounded house had finally accepted her. Josiah saw it, of course. He saw the cat curled on her blanket, saw the way it now followed her as she worked in the garden. He said nothing, but his observation was a constant, silent weight in the room. He watched her coaxing green shoots from the dry soil. He watched her kneading dough for bread, her hands quick and sure. He watched her sit with the cat, speaking to it in the soft, musical tones of her own language. He was a man who noticed everything and acknowledged nothing. But the silent reciprocity continued, his actions a language she was slowly learning to translate. One morning, she found a new, sturdy hoe with a smooth, polished handle leaning against the cabin wall, its blade sharp and clean. The old, rusty spade was gone. Another day, the wobbly step on the porch was firm and solid under her feet, secured with new nails. The biggest change came a few weeks later. After she had washed the supper dishes, she went to put them away on the shelf. She stopped, her hand hovering in midair. There were 2 cups sitting there. 2 plates. 2 forks. They were identical to the old ones, likely purchased on a trip to town she hadn't known he'd made. He had set a place for himself at the table. That evening, for the first time, Josiah sat across from her and they ate their meal in shared silence. The silence was different now. It was no longer a wall between them, but a space they occupied together. He still did not speak of personal things. He did not ask about her past, and he did not offer his own. But as he ate, his eyes met hers across the table, and for the first time, she thought she saw something other than grief in their depths. It was a quiet curiosity, a flicker of unguarded attention. It was a start. He was beginning to see her not as a bargain, but as a person. And in the dim, warm light of the cabin, with a one-eyed cat sleeping by the hearth, Lin-Mai felt the first, tentative unfurling of a feeling she had long forgotten, a cautious, fragile hope. The arrival of Mr. Croft a month later shattered the fragile peace. He rode up one afternoon on a glossy bay horse that looked out of place in the rugged landscape. He smiled broadly as he dismounted, removing his hat and wiping his brow with a silk handkerchief. He radiated a kind of sweaty, prosperous confidence that seemed to suck the clean mountain air from the valley. "Josiah, my good man," he boomed, clapping Josiah on the shoulder. Josiah flinched, his body stiffening at the familiar touch. "And the little bride?" Settling in well, I see. His eye swept over the cabin, lingering on the tidy garden, the clean-swept porch. It was the look of a man assessing his investment. Lin-Mai, who had been weeding the beans, stood up slowly, wiping her hands on her apron. She did not like the way he looked at her, at the home she was painstakingly trying to build. Josiah grunted a noncommittal reply. "Brought you a few things," Croft continued, untying a sack from his saddle. "Some flour, coffee." "On your account, of course." He handed the sack to Josiah, who took it without a word. Croft followed him into the cabin, and Lin-Mai trailed behind them, a sense of unease settling in her stomach. Croft sat at the table as if he owned it, pulling a worn leather ledger from his coat pocket. "Just wanted to go over the figures with you, Josiah." "Keep things square." Josiah remained standing, his arms crossed, a thunderous expression on his face. Lin-Mai busied herself making tea, her movements quiet, allowing her to listen. "The summer's been dry," Croft said, his voice dropping to a tone of manufactured sympathy. "I know that's put a strain on your prospecting." The last shipment of ore was a little light. He tapped a line in the ledger with a manicured finger. "And with the cost of supplies, plus the finder's fee for your lovely wife." He glanced at Lin-Mai with a smile that did not reach his eyes. "Well, the debt is climbing, my friend." "It's climbing." Lin-Mai set a cup of tea before him. As she did, her eyes fell on the page. It was a mess of columns and spidery handwriting. She could not read the words, but she knew numbers. And the number she saw felt wrong. They seemed too large, the columns unbalanced. She saw the price listed for the flour he had just delivered, and it was nearly double what she knew it cost in the town's general store. She saw a charge for a new pickaxe, but she knew Josiah's axe was old, the handle worn smooth with use. She filed the details away, her face a placid mask. She said nothing. Josiah stared at the ledger, his jaw tight. He was a man of the earth, of rock and water and sky. He understood the weight of an axe, the feel of the weather, the heft of ore. He did not understand the devious arithmetic of a dishonest man's book. He nodded curtly, a gesture of grim acceptance. Croft snapped the ledger shut, satisfied. "Not to worry," he said, draining his tea. "We'll work something out. I always look after my people." As he rode away, Lin-Mai watched him go, the dust settling behind him. She looked at Josiah, who was staring at the mountains, his face like carved stone. The quiet of their valley suddenly felt different. It was no longer peaceful. It was threatened. The heatwave arrived as if summoned by Mr. Croft's visit. The sun rose each day as a white, merciless disk in a hazy sky. The creek, which had been their lifeline, slowed to a sluggish, muddy trickle. The vibrant green of Lin-Mai's garden began to fade, the leaves of the bin plants turning yellow and curling at the edges. The earth cracked like old pottery. A new tension settled over the cabin, thick and suffocating as the heat itself. Josiah worked longer hours, his face grim, returning each evening with less and less to show for his efforts. The lack of water was affecting his small mining claim, turning the work of sifting for gold into a dusty, fruitless ordeal. They spoke even less than before, their shared anxiety a palpable presence. He would stand on the porch at dusk, staring at the dry creek bed, his hands clenched into fists. He was a man fighting a battle against the sky itself, and he was losing. Linmai watched the garden, her heart aching with each wilting plant. This small patch of earth was the only thing in this new world that felt truly hers, a place where her care and labor had yielded life. She gathered pine needles and dry leaves from the forest floor, creating a thick layer of mulch around the base of each plant to hold in every precious drop of moisture. She changed their watering schedule, carrying buckets from the deepest parts of the dwindling creek only in the cool of the pre-dawn hours, giving the water a chance to sink in before the sun could steal it. She also took stock of their supplies. With the garden failing, their winter stores would be dangerously low. She began to ration their food with a quiet, firm authority. She used less flour in the bread, supplementing it with ground acorns she gathered and leached of their bitterness. She made a thin, savory soup from bony fish she managed to catch in a deep pool of the creek, adding wild greens she recognized from the mountainside. Josiah ate what she put before him without complaint. He watched her tireless efforts, her clever ways of stretching their resources. He saw a resilience in her, a strength forged in a crucible of hardship he could only imagine. One evening, he found her sitting by the weak fire, carefully braiding long strips of pumpkin she had harvested early, preparing them to be dried for the winter. He sat down not across from her, but beside her on the hearth. It was the closest they had ever Saturday. He watched her hands work for a long time before he finally spoke, his voice rough. "You know how to survive," he said. It was not a question. It was a statement of fact, of awe. She looked up, her hand still. "Where I come from," she said softly, her English careful and deliberate, "there is no other choice." That night, the heat finally broke with a distant rumble of thunder. As the first drops of rain began to speckle the dust out, he told her about their son, Daniel, a boy with his mother's smile. They had been taken by a fever one brutal winter 5 years ago. He had buried them himself, on the ridge overlooking the valley. "I built this place for them," he said, his voice thick with unshed tears. After they were gone, the words just dried up inside me. Linmai listened, her heart aching for this silent man and the crushing weight of his grief. The empty space. She told him about the famine in her province, the desperation in her father. It was a small stack of papers, filled with his own blocky, careful handwriting. It was his record. Every ounce of ore he had given to Croft. Every bag of flour, every box of cartridges Croft had supplied. He had been keeping his own ledger all along, a simple, honest accounting. "I always felt," he said, tapping the papers, "that his numbers were wrong. He just never knew what to do about it." Linmai looked at the papers, and then at the man beside her. The shock she had been expecting on her arrival finally came. It was not a shock of wealth, but of character. This quiet, broken man owned something far more valuable. He owned the truth. And now, she realized, so did she. Mr. Croft returned 2 weeks later, his smile gone, replaced by a look of grim purpose. The rain had replenished the creek, but it had not replenished his patience. He dismounted and strode to the cabin door without waiting for an invitation. "Josiah," he said, his voice hard. "We need to settle this. Your debt is past due. I've been generous, but I can't carry you forever." Josiah stood in the doorway, blocking his path. He was no longer intimidated. He seemed taller, anchored by a new resolve. "Your numbers are wrong, Croft," he said, his voice low and steady. Croft laughed, a short, ugly sound. "My numbers? My ledger is meticulous. It's your memory that's failing, old man. Or perhaps you just can't do the math." He held out a piece of paper. "This is a deed transfer. You sign over the south acre, the part with the spring, and we'll call the debt square. It's more than fair." "No," Josiah said. The word was flat. "Final." Croft's face darkened with fury. "Don't be a fool. I have the law on my side. I can have the sheriff evict you by the end of the month. You'll be left with nothing." He shoved the paper at Josiah's chest. "Sign it." From behind Josiah, Lin Mai stepped forward. She held two things in her hands: Croft's official-looking invoice from his last visit, which he had left on the table, and one of Josiah's simple, handwritten pages. "Mr. Croft," she said, her voice clear and calm, though her heart was hammering. "Your flour is very expensive." Croft turned to her, his eyes narrowed. "What did you say?" "The price you write," she continued, holding up the invoice, "is $2. The price in town is $1. She then held up Josiah's paper. "You charge for a new axe." "He does not have a new axe." "You charge for 3 sacks of beans." He was given 1 inch. She had spent the last 2 weeks painstakingly going over Josiah's records, her memory of the figures in Croft's ledger, and the prices she had seen with her own eyes on her one trip to town with Josiah for supplies. She had practiced the English words over and over. One by one, she laid out the discrepancies. The overcharges, the supplies never delivered, the ore undervalued. It was a quiet, devastating recitation of fact. Croft was stunned into silence, his face paling. He had preyed on Josiah for years, counting on his grief, his isolation, and his lack of education. He had never counted on Lin Mai. He had seen her as just another part of the transaction, a silent, subservient woman. He had not seen her intelligence, her courage, her fierce loyalty. "This is nonsense," he stammered, but his voice lacked conviction. "Lies from a foreign woman who can barely speak the language." "She speaks the truth," Josiah said, his voice resonating with a power Croft had never heard from him. "And this is my land. You will leave now." For a long moment, the two men stared at each other. Then Croft snatched the deed from Josiah's hand, crumpled it into a ball, and threw it to the ground. He turned without another word, mounted his horse, and galloped away, his posture that of a defeated man. Lin Mai and Josiah stood together on the porch, watching until he was out of sight. The air felt clean again. The ride back from town was different. The silence was no longer heavy with unspoken grief or tension, but light with shared relief. They had gone to the land office, and with the town clerk as a witness, Josiah had paid his true, calculated debt to Mr. Croft in full, using a small pouch of gold he had saved. Mr. Croft had not met their eyes. He had signed the receipt and left quickly. The power he had held over Josiah was broken, dissolved by quiet facts and unwavering dignity. The victory was not loud or triumphant. It was a deep, resonant calm, a righting of a long-standing wrong. As they rode, Lin Mai felt the last knot of fear inside her finally loosen. She belonged here. She had fought for this place, for this man. When they reached the cabin, the late afternoon sun was turning the valley gold. General, the one-eyed cat, was waiting on the porch step, and he trotted over to rub against her legs, purring loudly. Inside, the cabin felt warm and welcoming. It felt like home. Josiah did not take his usual seat by the fire. He walked over to the corner where her small, tied-up bundle had sat since the day she arrived. It was her symbol of readiness, her proof that she was prepared to leave at a moment's notice. He picked it up. For a terrifying second, she thought he was going to hand it to her, that now the trouble was over, her purpose was served. Instead, he walked to the large wooden chest at the foot of his bed, a chest that had always been kept closed. He lifted the heavy lid. The scent of cedar and old wool drifted out. He gently placed her bundle inside, next to a folded quilt that looked like a woman's handiwork. He closed the lid, the sound a soft, definitive thud in the quiet room. He turned to her. His face, which had been a mask of sorrow for so long, was transformed. The harsh lines were softened, and there was a light in his eyes she had never seen before. He reached out and took her hand. His touch was no longer rough and impersonal, but gentle, warm. "Lin Mai," he said. It was the first time he had spoken her name with such tenderness, such reverence. It was more than just her name. It was an acknowledgement of everything she was, everything she had done. He did not have the words for love, for gratitude, for the profound shift she had brought to his life. So he used the only one that mattered, Stay, it was a request, not a command. It was a question and an answer all in one. A single word that held the promise of a shared future. Yes, she whispered, her own voice thick with emotion. I will stay, he nodded, a slow, small movement, but it was enough. The bargain was complete, remade not of necessity, but of something far stronger. Later that evening, she stood in the doorway, looking out at the first stars pricking the deep purple sky. The lamp she had lit cast a warm, steady glow from the window behind her, a beacon in the vast, quiet wilderness. She was no longer an outsider. She was home. Thank you for watching.